I adjusted the napkins on the dining room table and took a step back, examining the table setting critically. At 72, the habit of order was so deeply ingrained in me that any sloppiness seemed unacceptable. The white tablecloth was impeccable, the cutlery arranged according to the rules of etiquette my grandmother had taught me. In the center of the table was a vase with chrysanthemums from my own garden. Yellow and burgundy flower heads created a warm autumn bouquet. The smell of roast came from the kitchen, mingling with the aroma of apple pie. I glanced at the clock on the mantelpiece. 2:30. Colton and his family should be arriving in half an hour. Sunday lunches had become a tradition during Ralph's lifetime, and I'd kept up with it even now, 5 years after his death. The atmosphere had changed so much, though, that sometimes I wondered why I kept inviting my son. My name is Vivian Reinbird, and in all the years of my life, I cannot remember a period more strange and painful than these past 5 years. After my husband died, I expected grief, loneliness, and difficulty adjusting to my new life, but I didn't expect my own son to be a source of constant discomfort. I walked to the living room window and looked outside. The maples in the yard were burning yellow and red, a carpet of fallen leaves covering the lawn. The house at 75 Maple Street had been our family nest for over 30 years. Ralph had bought it when Colton was 15. Back then, the boy was delighted with the spacious rooms, the large yard, and the attic where he could set up a sanctuary to meet friends. Now that same son was saying very different things. Mom, do you really need that much space? The house is huge, and you practically live in one living room. It was a phrase Colton had uttered 3 weeks ago, when he'd come to fix a leaky faucet in the kitchen. I didn't say anything at the time, but his words lingered in my mind. Before Ralph died, my relationship with my son had been smooth. Colton called a couple times a week. He'd come over with Sloan and the kids on weekends, help with minor repairs. We discussed work, the grandchildren's school progress, vacation plans, the usual family conversations that I took for granted. Things changed after the funeral. At first, the changes were subtle. Colton called less often. His visits dwindled to the obligatory Sunday lunches. Sloan, who had been eager to help set the table and wash the dishes, now stayed in the living room, her phone constantly busy. The children still enjoyed coming to visit their grandmother, but their parents were clearly coming out of a sense of obligation. 30 years as an archivist at the city library had accustomed me to noticing details and picking up on subtle changes in people's behavior. I'd seen Colton's appraisal of rooms, his eyes lingering on antique furniture, on the paintings Ralph and I had bought when we were young. Something about those looks made me wary. I walked around the house checking for readiness. At my age, a lot of people have mobility problems, but I retained an enviable amount of energy and could manage the household without help. Everything in the house had its place. Every item was kept in perfect condition. Perhaps that was what irritated Colton. A couple of months ago, he walked through the rooms and remarked with deliberate surprise, "Mom, it's like a museum in here. Everything's in the same place it was 10 years ago." Then I replied that I liked consistency, but my son shook his head. "That's not permanence, that's stagnation. Time passes, people change, and it's like you're stuck in the past." Those words hurt me. I didn't consider myself a person who clung to the past. I read modern books, followed the news, and learned new technologies. Last week, I even mastered a new feature on the banking app on my phone, so I don't have to drive to the branch to pay bills. The other thing was that after Ralph's death, I wanted to keep things at least as familiar as possible. The house was full of memories of our life together, and every detail of the interior told a story. I went into the kitchen to check on the roast. The beef was browned to a golden crust, and the potatoes had acquired an appetizing crispy skin. A side dish of carrots and onions was simmering in the oven. Everything was prepared according to recipes I'd collected over decades. Ralph especially loved my beef with rosemary and thyme. Colton had once enjoyed eating home-cooked food, too, but in recent years he'd been complaining more and more often about feeling heavy after dinner. Mom, can't we switch to something lighter? This kind of food makes my stomach hurt, he said a month ago. Sloan will show you recipes for healthy salads. I agreed to try the new dishes then, but I was secretly offended. These recipes had been passed down in our family for generations. My mother cooked exactly the same way. Her mother did too. Had it all become inappropriate now? The sound of a car pulling up pulled me from my musings. I looked out the window and saw Colton's familiar sedan. 4 figures got out of the car. My tall son in a plaid shirt, slender Sloan in jeans and a pullover, 10-year-old Brixton, and 8-year-old Tallis. The kids immediately rushed over to the swing set Ralph had set up on the big oak tree for little Colton. I opened the door before my son could ring the bell. It was a long-standing tradition of ours. I always greeted guests on the doorstep. "Hi, Mom." Colton gave me a brief hug, smelling of cologne and the faint odor of cigarettes. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine. Come on in. Dinner's almost ready." Sloan nodded a greeting and walked straight into the living room. Her blonde hair was neatly styled, her makeup flawless. At 42, she looked considerably younger than her age, though there was a tiredness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Colton took off his jacket and hung it in the hallway. His son's movements seemed familiar, but there was some tension in them. He looked around with the same scrutinizing gaze that had begun to appear in his eyes lately. An appraiser's gaze, I thought, and immediately tried to push the thought away. "Are the kids outside?" I asked. "Yes, let them play. Fresh air is good for them." We walked to the living room, where Sloan had settled into a chair by the window. She was studying her phone as if the fate of the world depended on her attention. My sister-in-law used to be more outgoing, interested in what I was doing, talking about work and the kids. Now it was as if she had erected an invisible wall around me. "Do you want coffee?" I offered. "Let's do it after lunch," Colton replied, sinking down on the couch. "How are you doing? How's your health?" "Can't complain. The doctor says I'm in great shape for 72 years old." "That's good." Colton was silent for a moment, then added, "How's the house? Everything okay?" I was wary. Over the past few months, the talk about the house had been coming up more and more often. First, my son was interested in the condition of the roof, then the heating system, then the plumbing. Each time he started from afar, but gradually the conversation boiled down to the fact that maintaining a large house is a serious burden for an elderly person. "It's all right. A plumber came last week. He checked the pipes." "And what did he say?" "That everything's fine for now, but in about 5 years you should think about replacing the plumbing in the basement." Colton nodded with the look of a man who'd gotten confirmation of his suspicions. Sloan lifted her head from the phone and cast a quick glance at her husband. There was something in that look that I didn't like, some kind of understanding, as if they'd discussed the matter before. "In 5 years," Colton repeated slowly. "That's a serious expense." "Ralph left enough money to maintain the house," I replied calmly. Of course, of course. It's just—" My son was quiet. He was choosing his words. "It's just that sometimes it seems like you're putting too much effort into this house. Maybe you should think about something more practical." I knew what he was getting at. We'd had this conversation before, and each time Colton had gotten more insistent in his innuendo, but today there was a new note in his voice, an impatience that hadn't been there before. From the street came the tinkling laughter of the grandchildren. Brixton and Tallis were swinging on the old swing, their joyful voices reminding me of the time their father had spent on that same swing. Back then, Colton was a happy kid who loved to visit his parents. What changed? When did my son start looking at his parents' house as a burden? A few minutes later, everyone was gathered around the dining room table. I set out the dishes, watching the family take their customary seats. Colton sat to my right, Sloane across from him, the kids next to their father. Brixton immediately reached for the bread, but his mother jerked him back with a look. "Wait until everyone is seated," she said quietly, not taking her eyes off the phone. I served the main course and began to put on portions. The beef turned out especially well, soft, flavorful, with a golden crust. The potatoes fell apart at the light touch of a fork. Tallis was looking at her plate with interest, and Brixton was already eating with the appetite of a boy of his age. At first, the conversation was languid, as it had been lately. Colton talked about work, and I asked about the kids' schoolwork. Sloane would occasionally lift her head from the phone to make a comment, but I could feel the tension in the air. Something was wrong, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was yet. "How are things at work?" I asked Colton, cutting up the meat. "Fine. Got new equipment in the warehouse. Had to retrain everyone." He chewed slowly, as if thinking over each bite. "The bosses promise it'll increase efficiency, but so far it's just a headache." "Did you get used to the new technique quickly?" "Yeah, I haven't had much trouble. It's not like it's the first time I've encountered automated systems." There was a touch of pride in his voice. "Sloane got a promotion last week." I turned to my sister-in-law. "Congratulations. Tell me more about it." Sloane lifted her head from the phone and smiled weakly. "Thank you. I'll be overseeing corporate clients from now on. The pay is higher, but there's more responsibility. I'll have to travel more for meetings." "That's great." I tried to continue the conversation. "I guess you'll have new plans now, won't you?" Sloane and Colton exchanged a look. There was something in that look that made me wary, some kind of understanding between them, as if they'd discussed what they were going to say beforehand. "Yeah, there are plans," the son said slowly. "Just wanted to talk to you." I continued eating, waiting for him to continue. Tallis quietly asked if she could have more potatoes, and I happily put another portion down for her. Kids' company was always an outlet for me during these tense family gatherings. "The thing is," Colton began, setting aside his fork and leaning back in his chair, "it's getting crowded in our house. The kids are growing up. They need more space. Brixton is already asking for a separate room." "Yes, Grandma," perked up the boy. "And now I have to sleep in the same room as Tallis. It's inconvenient, especially when I'm doing my homework." "Also," Sloane added, finally putting the phone away, "we're thinking about getting a dog. Brixton's been asking for one for a while now, and the doctor said a pet would help the kids become more responsible." "Yes, Grandma, we want a Labrador." Brixton bounced in his chair with excitement. "Or a golden retriever. But it wouldn't be comfortable in our apartment. There's not much room at all." I nodded. Dogs do like space, and Labradors are especially active. "Exactly." Colton leaned forward. "And we were thinking, maybe it's time to reevaluate our family's living situation." Something inside me clenched. I knew where this conversation was going, but I decided not to rush things. I wanted to hear exactly how they planned to submit their offer. "How's that?" I asked, continuing to eat. "Well," my son coughed, "figure it out. You live in a huge house all by yourself, and we're agonizing in a cramped apartment with two kids. Doesn't that seem a little wrong?" Sloane nodded. "Yeah, and then, Vivian, keeping such a big house at your age is really hard. So many rooms, so much to clean, so many things to repair." "I manage," I replied calmly. "Of course you are." Colton waved his hand. "We don't doubt your abilities. But why do you need all this extra worry? Look, the plumber came last week, the roofer the other day." "The roof is leaking?" I wondered. "You didn't tell me anything." "Why should I bother you anymore? I take care of those problems myself." There was a note of irritation in my son's voice. That's exactly what I'm talking about. The house needs constant attention, constant investment, and you can't handle it all anymore. But I don't handle it alone either. There are craftsmen, there are specialists. I pay them for the work, and everything gets solved. Mom, Colton interrupted me, his tone becoming more insistent. You don't understand the scope of the problem. This isn't just about repairs, it's about common sense. The logical thing to do would be to turn the house over to a young family who can really take care of it. Tallis stopped eating and shifted her gaze from her father to her grandmother with interest. Brixton was quiet as well, sensing the adults' tension. Kids, why don't you go play in the yard? I suggested. Finish eating and go outside. It's such beautiful weather out there. They quickly finished eating and ran out of the house. I was grateful for this opportunity to talk frankly, without witnesses, though I doubted the conversation would be pleasant. Colton, I placed the utensils on my plate. This house is our family home. Your father bought it for our family, put his heart and soul into it. Yeah, but Dad's gone. Sloane actively entered the conversation for the first time. And you live here like a caretaker at a museum. That's no life, Vivian. Why not a life? I'm comfortable here. I have everything I need. My neighbors are close by. Your neighbors are old people who will all move away or die soon, Colton said sharply. And you're going to stay in this house until you die? I mean, that's awful. Think about your future. His words hurt me, but I tried not to show it. He'd been talking to me more and more lately, in that patronizing tone, as if I were a neglectful child instead of a mother. I'm not going anywhere, and I don't think my life is terrible. Mom, you misunderstand me. Colton tried to soften his tone. I'm just thinking for your own good. Imagine how wonderful it would be if you moved into a cozy apartment closer to us. We could see each other more often. The kids could run in to see you after school. And the house? We'd keep the house. We'd repair it, keep an eye on all the systems. The kids could play here, have a full family life. His eyes lit up. They could invite friends over, have birthday parties in their own backyard. Sloane nodded. And think of the expense, Vivian. Utility bills for a house like this, property taxes, repairs. It all puts a heavy burden on you. And in a small apartment, the expenses are many times less. I have the money. You do now. Colton leaned across the table toward me. But what about 5, 10 years from now? Suddenly you'll need expensive medication or care or something. Why spend the family money to maintain a huge house when you can save it for the really important things? I got up from the table and started gathering the dishes. I needed time to think and calm down. My hands were shaking slightly, but I hoped they wouldn't notice. Mom, are you offended? Colton followed me into the kitchen. No, just tired of this conversation. But it's not like we're suggesting anything bad. We want everyone to have a good time. I put the plates in the sink and turned to my son. And you didn't think it was appropriate to ask my opinion? Just put me on the spot, like, Mom, you're moving out and we're taking the house. Of course we're asking you. We're asking you now. No, Colton, you're not asking. You're forcing it. Sloane walked into the kitchen. Vivian, maybe you shouldn't make a decision right now. Just think about it. It's not like we're rushing it. But that's not what I read in her eyes. They were rushing, and very much so. What if I say no? I asked. Colton and Sloane exchanged a look. There was something in that look that I strongly disliked. Well, my son said slowly, I hope it doesn't come to that. You're a reasonable woman, Mom. You realize that our proposal is logical and beneficial to everyone. For everyone but me. Why accept you? Interposed Sloane. You'll get a peaceful old age, caring neighbors, no hassle with the house. And in return, I'll give you the only thing I have left of my old life. No one's taking the memories away from you, Colton said. And a house is just a building. Those words hurt me. To him, a house was really just a building, real estate that could be valued in dollars. But to me, it was part of my soul. Why don't we go back to the living room? Suggested Sloane. Let's continue the conversation in a more relaxed setting. We returned to the living room, where we could see the yard through the windows. The kids were still playing. Now they were building something out of fallen leaves. Their laughter came through the open windows, creating a deceptive sense of family idyll. Mom? Colton sat down next to me on the couch. I know it's a tough decision, but think about it practically. You're not young anymore. I'm 72 years old, not 90. Of course, but the older a person gets, the harder it is for them to handle a large household. What if something happens? What if you fall or get sick and there's no one around? I have a phone. I have neighbors. Neighbors are old people just like you, and we live half an hour away. That's too far in an emergency. Sloane walked over to the window. And there's always medical care at the apartment complex for people your age. 24-hour supervision, organized meals, cultural programs. You mean a nursing home? No, you don't, resented Colton. These are modern complexes for active seniors. Interesting people live there. There's a library, a gymnasium, a swimming pool. And freedom? What freedom? Freedom to fix leaky pipes? Freedom to worry about electricity bills? Freedom to live in your own home and make your own decisions. Colton sighed. Mom, I can see that you're not ready to discuss this today, but promise me you'll think about it. Seriously think about our offer. And if I think about it and still say no? Again, that look between them. Again, something unpleasant in their eyes. Then, Colton was silent, choosing his words. Then we'll have to look for other solutions. What other solutions? Well, there are various options. We can get guardianship if we can prove you're incapable of making rational decisions. We could go through the courts. Are you threatening me? I'm not threatening. I'm just explaining reality. A family has the right to protect the interests of an elderly relative, even if they don't realize it themselves. There was a cold determination in his words that startled me. I realized this wasn't just a conversation about moving. It was a warning. A child's cry came from the street. We all looked out the window. Tallis had fallen playing in the leaves and was now crying. Brixton was helping her up. Why don't we check to see if they're okay? I suggested. They'll be fine. Colton brushed it off. A little bruising builds character. But I went out into the yard anyway. Tallis was really only startled. There were no serious injuries. I hugged the girl, calmed her down, and the children ran off to play again. When I got back to the house, Colton and Sloane were talking quietly about something. When they saw me, they stopped talking. What were they talking about? I asked. Oh, just about the kids, Sloane replied vaguely. Thinking about whether it's time to go home. I glanced at the clock. It was only 4:30. This early? You usually stay out longer than that. We have things to do, Colton said, getting up. Mom, do you promise to think about our proposal? I'll think about it. And give you an answer soon? You won't procrastinate for months? What's the rush? There's no rush. It's just, well, kids grow up fast. And the sooner we get this settled, the easier it will be for everyone to adjust. They gathered up the children and began to pack up. The goodbye was kind of strained, not as warm as usual. The kids hugged me, but the parents limited themselves to formal kisses on the cheek. When the car disappeared around the corner, I stood on the porch for a long time, pondering the conversation. Something in the behavior of my son and daughter-in-law alarmed me. Too many hints, too many loose ends. Colton's words about other decisions were especially troubling. What did he mean by that? Would they really be willing to go to the extreme? After lunch, we returned to the living room. The kids ran out into the yard, and I could see through the window Brixton pushing the swing that Tallis was sitting on. Their laughter came through the open windows, creating a deceptive sense of family well-being. I served coffee in beautiful cups I'd bought with Ralph at the antique store. We were a young couple then, dreaming of a long life together in our own home. Colton sat on the couch with his arms spread across the backrest. He looked relaxed, but I could feel the tension emanating from him. Sloane sat in a chair next to the window where she could see the kids. She didn't pull out her phone anymore, which in itself seemed suspicious. Usually her sister-in-law didn't part with it for a minute. "Great coffee," Colton said, sipping from his cup. "I remember Dad always praised your coffee." I nodded, not knowing what to say to this unexpected display of sentimentality. After the recent conversation at the table, any mention of my father seemed like an attempt at emotionalism. "Do you remember when Dad and I used to build a treehouse in the yard?" the son continued. "I was just a little kid then, about 8 years old. Of course I remember. You were very proud of that treehouse." I smiled involuntarily, remembering how little Colton used to lug his toys up there and have secret reunions with his friends. Too bad it wasn't preserved. Brixton would have loved it. Sloane looked up. "It's true, though. Kids are so lacking in play space, they literally climb the walls in our apartment, especially on rainy days." I could feel the conversation turning back in a familiar direction. They had clearly thought through these tactics in advance. First, the direct pressure at the dinner table, now a more subtle approach through reminiscing and caring for the kids. "They have a great playground in their backyard, though," I said, "and a park nearby." "Yeah, but it's not the same as having your own yard." Sloane stood up and walked over to the window. "Look how happy they are here. They have a place to run around, to yell. In an apartment building, you're always having to fuss over them. The neighbors downstairs complaining about stomping. The neighbors on the side complaining about loud games." I followed her gaze. The kids did look happy. Tallis had hopped off the swing and was now picking a bouquet of yellow leaves. Brixton had found a long stick and was scribbling something on the ground with it. Colton supported his wife. "It's a nightmare in winter, locked in 4 walls for months on end. Brixton already says he wants to play hockey, but where do we keep all the equipment? This place could have a rink right in the backyard." "A rink?" I wondered. "It doesn't get that cold here in the winter." "Well, not a real ice rink, of course, but a place for roller skating, for example, or for playing basketball. You could put a ring on the garage." "You can never have too much space when you're a kid," I agreed, hoping to move the conversation to more generalities. "Exactly." Sloane returned to the chair. "And here, they'd have everything: the space, the fresh air, the opportunity to have pets. Tallis dreams of having a kitten, but that's problematic in an apartment." "Why problematic? Lots of people keep cats in apartments." "Well," Sloane faltered, "the property manager's allergic. She lives a floor above and she's very sensitive to cat hair." That explanation struck me as odd, but I didn't delve any further. Instead, I suggested, "Why don't we go to a pet store? We could look at fish or parrots. You can keep them in any apartment." "Mom," Colton set the cup on the table, "you don't understand. This isn't about pets. It's about kids needing to grow up in a normal environment. They should have a home, not a rented apartment." "Is your apartment a rental?" "No, my own, but it's small, and in a dormitory neighborhood where there's nothing but paneled houses. No public gardens, no entertainment for the kids." Sloane nodded. "And this house is a different story. There's a soul here, a family history. The kids could grow up where their father grew up, absorb the family traditions." "What family traditions?" I grinned involuntarily. Well, Sunday dinners, for example, games in the yard, meetings with relatives. We don't have any other relatives. There will be, exclaimed Colton. I mean, the kids will bring friends, then their families will show up. The house will become a center of attraction for everyone. I stood up and walked over to the fireplace where the family photos stood. One of them showed little Colton sitting on Ralph's shoulders in the front yard of the same house. The boy was smiling full mouth, holding onto his father's head. Yes, I said, there are a lot of memories here. And there could be even more, Sloane added cautiously. Imagine how wonderful it would be if Brixton and Tallis were creating their childhood memories here. Colton got up from the couch and walked over to me. Mom, I know this is hard for you to think about, but face it, you can't live in the past forever. I'm not living in the past. Yes, you do. You keep everything exactly as it was under Dad. His office, his books are in the same places. Even his coffee mug is in the same locker. Those words hurt. Yes, I did keep many of Ralph's things, but it was my way of coping with the loss, and no one had the right to forbid me from doing so. What's wrong with that? Bad? Mom, you've turned the house into a memorial. That's not healthy. Sloane added quietly, Vivian, maybe moving out would help you. How shall I put it? Start a new chapter of your life. I turned my back to them, pretending to look at the pictures. In reality, I needed time to pull myself together. Their words sounded caring, but I sensed very different motives behind them. A new chapter, I repeated slowly. And where do you think this new chapter should take place? Well, there are beautiful complexes for people your age. Colton spoke faster, sensing that I wasn't immediately rejecting their offer. With all the amenities, medical care, organized recreational activities, I've even looked at the brochures. Have you looked at the options yet? Just out of curiosity, wanted to understand what the possibilities were. He looked a little embarrassed. It's really elaborate. Own apartments, common recreation areas, a library, even a small medical center. You mean a nursing home? No, they're modern apartment complexes. Active seniors live there. They have hobby clubs, excursions, cultural events. Some even work remotely. Sloane stood up and walked over to us. And best of all, no chores. It's all included in the price. You could finally take care of yourself, your hobbies. What hobbies? I don't know. Painting, yoga, reading? I thought you said you wanted to read more. Or maybe learning languages. There are very popular courses for older people right now. I did mention this, but in a completely different context. I wanted to spend more time reading without leaving my home. And traveling, exclaimed Colton. Without the worries of home, you could travel anywhere. To Europe, for instance. You've always dreamed of seeing Paris, haven't you? I never dreamed of Paris. Well, not Paris, but something else. It's all about freedom of movement. Outside the window, the children were still playing. Brixton had made a big pile of fallen leaves and was now jumping into it, while Tallis was gathering the prettiest leaves for a bouquet. They looked so happy and carefree. What if I say no? I asked without turning to them. A silence ensued, too long to be natural. Mom, Colton finally said, it's not like we're forcing you. We just want you to think about it. How much thinking time are you giving me? Again the pause. There is time, Sloane said uncertainly. But, well, kids grow up fast, and the longer we put off moving, the harder it will be for them to adjust to a new home. Also, Colton added, winter's coming. It's a lot harder to move in the winter, and apartment complexes have waiting lists for good apartments right now. I realized they wanted a solution here and now. This whole conversation was a planned attempt to get me to agree to their terms. So, if I understand correctly, I turned to them, You want me to give you the house and move into an assisted living facility. To an apartment complex, Colton corrected. Okay, to an apartment complex. And what do I get in return? They looked at each other for a moment. You get? Mom, you get a peaceful, worry-free old age. And the chance to see the grandkids more often, Sloane added. And the house? The house will stay in the family. We'll keep it safe, fix it up, keep an eye on things, maybe even expand it, add a veranda or a conservatory. I nodded, considering their words. A tense silence hung in the living room, broken only by children's voices from the street. And the paperwork? I asked. How will the transfer of the house technically be formalized? Colton perked up, apparently taking my question as agreement. Very simple. You put a deed of gift in my name, and I take care of all the upkeep. Plus, I help pay for your new place. A deed of gift, not a will? A will is when a person dies. We're talking about you living and enjoying life for years to come. A will is done while you're alive. And after that, the house legally becomes yours? Well, yes, but you realize it's purely a formality. The house is still in the family, and it will remain so. So I can come back at any time? Colton hesitated. Theoretically, sure. But after all, the goal is for you to settle into your new place and make yourself at home there. And if I don't like it in this apartment complex? You will, Sloane said confidently. It's such a friendly atmosphere. And then you can always transfer to another complex if you don't like it. To another complex, but not back to the house? Again the pause. Mom, Colton sat down next to me. You do realize that if we move here with the kids, we're going to be settling in for a long time. We'll remodel to suit ourselves, change the layout. Change the layout? Well, we could knock down some walls, expand the kitchen. The children's rooms could be remodeled. Nothing drastic, just adapt the house to modern life. I imagined how they would break down the walls in the house that Ralph and I had furnished with such love. How all the familiar details would disappear, the whole atmosphere of our life together. And my things? You'll take the most expensive ones with you, Sloane said. Photos, documents, jewelry, and the furniture. Honestly, it's pretty old by now. It's easier to buy new. Old furniture, I repeated. The couch where Ralph and I used to spend our evenings. The dining table where our children grew up. The bed where he died in my arms. Vivian, don't feel bad. Sloane sat down on the other side. The furniture is just stuff, and the memories will stay with you forever. Yeah, but… No buts. Colton took my hand. Mom, it's time to start thinking about the future instead of the past. You're still full of energy. You've got years ahead of you. Why spend them maintaining a huge house? This house is my life. Was your life. Now it's time to move on to a new phase. A child's laughter came from the window. I looked out into the yard and saw Brixton and Tallis playing hide and seek among the trees. They looked so small and defenseless. And the children? I asked. Have you explained to them that you're going to move here? Not yet, Colton said. Wanted to talk things over with you first, but they'll be thrilled when they find out. Brixton's already asked why Grandma lives in such a big house by herself, Sloane added. Children sense injustice. Injustice? Well, yes, they're cramped for space, and you have whole rooms empty. Those words sounded like an accusation. Did it appear that in the eyes of my grandchildren, I was a selfish person who doesn't want to share? I never forbade them from being here. Being is not the same as living, Colton said. The children need to feel that the house belongs to them too. It will belong to them after I die. And why wait? Why waste time? There was an impatience in his voice that alerted me, as if my life was an unfortunate delay in their plans. Colton, I said quietly, What if I just said no? No explanation, no discussion, just no. He let go of my hand and leaned back against the back of the couch. Then I'll be sorry. Sorry? That you're choosing selfishness over family. Those words hit me like a slap in the face. Selfishness? Wanting to live in your own home is selfishness? What happens then? I asked. If I say no? Colton and Sloane glanced over again. There was something sinister in their gaze. Well, Sloane said slowly, we may have to take more drastic measures. What kind of measures? There are various options, Colton answered evasively. The important thing is that it doesn't come to that. I realized it was a warning, a soft, veiled one, but a warning. Agree voluntarily, or we'll make you. At that moment, the children came running into the house, flushed and cheerful. Grandmother, may we play some more? Asked Tallis. Of course, dear. No, said Colton, getting up. It's time to get ready to go home. But Daddy, it's still early. We've got things to do. Pack up. The kids whined unhappily, but obeyed. As they gathered their things, Sloane came over to me. Vivian, think about our conversation. Seriously think about it. Time is running out. What happens if time runs out? I asked. She didn't answer, only shook her head sadly. When they left, I stood at the window for a long time, looking at the empty yard. Fallen leaves lay in piles where the children were playing. By evening, they would be blown away by the wind, and there would be no trace of today's play, just as there would be no trace of my old life if I agreed to their proposal. The tension in the room was becoming more and more palpable. I could see Colton tapping his fingers nervously on the armrest of the couch, and Sloane glancing at her husband every now and then, as if encouraging him or expecting him to act decisively. The children's voices in the yard were growing more and more distant. Brixton and Tallis had obviously moved to the far side of the garden. Mom, Colton suddenly straightened up and looked me straight in the eye. I saw something new in his gaze, a hardness I hadn't noticed before. Let's talk straight, without all this back and forth. I'm listening, I replied, instinctively tensing up. You live alone in a house that could easily accommodate two families. You have no plans for the future except to sit here until you die. And my wife and children and I are suffering in cramped quarters. His voice grew sharper. Doesn't that seem selfish to you? Selfish? I repeated, not believing my ears. Yes, selfish. You think only of yourself and your habits. What about us? What about your grandchildren? Sloane nodded. Colton's right, Vivian. It's not like we're strangers. We're family. It's precisely because we're family that I expected you to understand, I replied. This house means a lot to me. What does it mean to you? Colton stood up and started pacing around the room. A bunch of memories? So the memories are in your head, not in the walls. You don't understand. No, you're the one who doesn't understand. He turned to me sharply. We're offering you a reasonable way out. You move to a comfortable place where you'll be taken care of, and the house goes to someone who really needs it. The house is mine, I said quietly. Yours for now. But let's be realistic. You're not forever. And when you're gone, I'll still have the house. So why procrastinate? The words sounded like a slap in the face. I looked at Sloane, expecting her to soften her husband's rudeness, but my sister-in-law remained silent, studying her fingernails. So you expect me to die? I asked. That's not what I meant. It's just, Mom, be reasonable. Deed the house to me now, while you're healthy and can make decisions. It'll be better for everyone. Best for you. And for you, too. No worries, no repair costs, no utility problems. I got up from my chair and walked over to the window. The kids had found an old rake in the shed and were now gathering leaves into a huge pile. Brixton was bossing his sister around, showing her where to pile the leaves. They looked so much like their father when they were kids. The same excitement, the same enthusiasm for the game. What if I say no? I asked without turning around. Mom, Colton came up behind me, don't be silly. Of course you'll say yes. You're a reasonable woman. In his tone, I heard the confidence of a man who thinks the outcome of a conversation is a foregone conclusion, as if my opinion was just a formality to be honored. No, I said, turning to him. I won't agree. Colton's face showed a look of surprise that changed to irritation. What do you mean, I won't agree? Exactly what I said. I'm not going to give you the house. But why? Sloane rose from her chair. I thought we explained that it would be best for everyone. For everyone but me. Mom. Colton took a step toward me, and anger flashed in his eyes. You're acting like a cranky child. I'm offering you a reasonable solution, and you're being stubborn. I'm protecting my home. Your house? Who bought it? Who paid the mortgage for 30 years? Dad, now you're acting like it's your sole property. Ralph bought the house for our family. For me, too. He bought it for the family, yes, and I'm part of that family. A major part, by the way, because I have children, a future. Those words hurt me deeply. So after my husband died, I had no right to a future? I have a future too, I said quietly. Colton snorted. What future? Sitting in this house and slowly getting decrepit? Colton, interjected Sloane for the first time. You shouldn't say that. But he couldn't stop now. No, let Mama hear the truth. You're living in the past, Mom. You've turned into an old woman who clings to things because there's nothing else. You have no right to talk to me like that. I have. I'm your son, and I see how you're degenerating. Do you know what the neighbors think about all this? What people think? I remained silent, feeling the anger rising inside. But it wasn't just anger at the hurtful words. It was resentment at the realization that my own son only saw me as a hindrance to what he wanted. People think, Colton continued, that an old woman is occupying a house that could serve a young family, that she's a selfish woman who thinks only of herself. That's enough, I said. No, it's not enough. It's time you heard the truth. You're greedy, Mom. Greedy and selfish. You're willing to deprive your own grandchildren of a normal childhood just for your whims. I said enough. What are you going to do? Kick me out? Then we'll leave ourselves, and we won't come back, and we won't bring the children. You'll sit alone in your palace and remember how you could have changed everything. He walked over to the table, where there were still plates of dessert. I'd made apple pie from my grandmother's recipe with cinnamon and vanilla. Colton usually loved my baked goods, but today he barely touched the pie. You know what? He picked up one of the plates. I've had enough of this spectacle, enough of your whims and manipulations. You're a greedy old woman who thinks of no one but herself. With those words, he hurled the plate in my direction. The porcelain plate with the remains of the pie flew past my head and shattered against the wall, showering the floor with shards. Pieces of apple pie smeared across the wallpaper. There was dead silence in the room. Sloane froze with her mouth open, staring at the shattered plate. Colton was breathing hard, his face red with anger. I stood still, staring at the shards. At that moment, something changed inside me completely. The last doubts, the last hopes that I was misreading the situation, were gone. Now I knew exactly who I was dealing with. Silently, I walked to the dining table. There, under the white tablecloth, lay the folder I had prepared in advance. I had waited a long time for this moment, though I hoped it would never come. I pulled out the folder and walked leisurely over to Colton. He was still standing by the desk, breathing heavily and clearly not understanding what was going on. Read it, I said, holding out the folder to him. Colton took the folder bewildered, still reeling from his outburst of anger. His hands were shaking slightly, either from anger or from the realization that he'd just thrown a plate at his own mother. Sloane stepped closer, peering over his shoulder. I stood nearby, watching their faces and waiting for a reaction. My son opened the folder and stared at the first sheet. It was a printout of text messages dated 3 months ago. I watched his eyes skim over the lines, his expression gradually changing. Bewilderment was replaced by understanding, understanding by horror. "What is it?" he asked hoarsely, but kept reading. Sloane peered into the folder and pulled away abruptly, as if she'd seen a snake. Her face went pale and her lips trembled. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. I didn't answer, continuing to watch. Colton turned the page. There was the next series of messages from last month, then another from the day before yesterday. His fingers tentatively flipped through the pages, and with each new one, I could see him sinking deeper into shock. On the second page were messages between Sloane and her sister, where the sister-in-law complained about a stubborn mother-in-law who doesn't get the hint. Page 3 was her and Colton discussing plans to renovate the house after I moved in. On the fourth, correspondence with a realtor about a possible sale. "Mom," Colton lifted his head, tears in his eyes. It, it's not what you think." "What do I think?" I asked calmly. We, we were just discussing options for the future. We weren't planning anything specific." I nodded at the folder. "Keep reading." The next page contained screenshots of their correspondence with the appraisal company. They were requesting the value of the house, inquiring about how quickly an appraisal could be done, details about the condition of the foundation and roof. The date of those messages was 2 weeks ago. Colton slowly turned the page. There were photos of our house, taken explicitly for the appraisal, professional shots of the facade, the yard, the interior, the kind of photos that are usually taken for real estate listings on websites. "You had no right to," began Sloane, but she faltered, realizing she'd said something unnecessary. "Had no right to what?" I inquired. "To find out that my own son and his wife were planning my death?" "We weren't planning to kill anyone," exclaimed Colton. "Mom, come on, think rationally. We were just preparing for the inevitable." "For the inevitable?" At 72, I'm not old enough to think death is inevitable in the next few years. He continued leafing through the folder. On the next pages were printouts of their discussions on how to divide the money from the sale of the house. Sloane suggested they spend some of it on a new car, some of it set aside for the children's education. Colton agreed, adding that he wanted to invest the money in expanding the garage. "You've even picked out a car already," I remarked. "Beautiful model, by the way. Expensive." Sloane lowered her head, unable to meet my gaze. Colton continued reading, his face growing increasingly gray. On one of the pages was their correspondence from a month ago. Sloane was writing to her husband. "Your mom is too healthy for her age. My aunt died of a heart attack at 70, and this one's still not gonna make it." Colton replied, "We have good heredity. Grandma lived to be 85. Maybe we'll have to wait another 15 years. After reading this, the son abruptly slammed the folder shut and tossed it aside. "It's not what it seems," he said in a trembling voice. "We didn't wish you dead. It's just, people sometimes say stupid things when they're angry or upset." "Stupid things?" I picked up the folder from the floor and opened it to the right page. "Listen carefully to what you wrote to your wife 3 weeks ago. The old woman's got a nerve. Today she said she won't give the house to anyone while she's alive. She thinks she's the queen of the place. I'm sick of her greed. I wish she'd make room for a normal family." Colton covered his face with his hands. "And here's your answer, Sloane," I continued. Maybe find a way to speed up the process? I've heard that nursing homes make people fade away quickly from homesickness. We should put her there under the guise of health care. The sister-in-law looked up sharply. That's not what I meant. It was just an emotional reaction. You're misunderstanding. Misunderstand? I flipped a few more pages. And what's this? This is where you discuss what story to tell the neighbors after I move in. So no one will think you kicked an elderly woman out of her own home. The folder actually contained their correspondence about how to present the situation to the neighborhood. They planned to tell them that I had made the decision to move into a specialized senior complex on my own, that it was my initiative. Colton stood up and began pacing the room, rubbing his hair nervously. Mom, I understand how this looks, but you know that people say a lot of things in their hearts. It doesn't mean this is what we really wanted. Then what do these pictures mean? I pointed to the professional shots of the house. Were they taken for a family album? Sloan tried to take the lead. Vivian, we did consult with a realtor, but only to understand the value of the property. It's normal to know the value of the family property. Normal? And this is normal? I found another page. This is where you write to your sister. If the old lady doesn't die in the next 5 years, we'll be broke on rent. Colton says we can get a guardianship and declare her incompetent. Then we can have official possession of the house. The silence in the room became deafening. Even the children's voices in the yard had fallen silent. Apparently, the grandchildren had gone to play by the neighbor's fence. Custody, I repeated slowly. So, you were planning to incapacitate me? No, exclaimed Colton. We would never do that. It was just a theoretical discussion. Theoretical? And right here you write the address of a law firm that specializes in such cases. And the time of the consultation is tomorrow at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Colton froze. He'd forgotten about that correspondence entry. We canceled the meeting, Sloan said quietly. When? Last night, after you decided to try to talk me into volunteering? They were silent, and that silence was more eloquent than any words. I realized that going into a nursing home or being incapacitated was Plan B in case I didn't agree to give up the house voluntarily. There were a few more pages in the folder, but I could see they had already read enough. Their faces expressed a mixture of shame, fear, and anger. Anger at me for finding out about their plans. Colton raised his head and looked at me. Where did you get all this? Were you spying on us? Didn't I have the right to do that? I asked back. Colton slumped down on the couch, still holding a few pages from the folder. His face was drained, as if he'd suddenly aged a few years. Sloan stood at the window, biting her lip nervously and avoiding looking in my direction. The atmosphere in the room was so tense that the air seemed to thicken. Mom, my son finally spoke, his voice sounding hoarse. I I don't know what to say. You can start by explaining, I offered, settling into the chair across from him. Like how long you've been planning all this for. We haven't planned anything. I mean, not the way you think. He ran his hands over his face. It was just talk, you know? When one's tired, when money's tight, when the kids ask for things you can't give them. Did the kids ask for Grandma to be sent to a nursing home? I clarified. No, of course not. The kids don't know about anything at all. Colton stood up and started pacing the room again. Mom, understand, we're living in a cramped apartment paying a loan. Sloan's working late, so am I. And there's a house like this sitting empty. Empty? I raised an eyebrow. I live in it. Well, yeah, but you know what I mean. The house is huge, and you're using barely a third of the space. Sloan turned away from the window and looked at me for the first time in the last few minutes. Vivian, we really didn't mean to hurt you. It's just the situation. It's weighing on us. What situation? I pulled another sheet out of the folder. This is where you write to your sister about buying a new $800 bag. And you complain that mother in law is sitting on a bag of money and we're saving money on everything. Is that called financial hardship? Sloan blushed. It was a sale. And then I had the right to buy myself something nice. Of course you did. But then you shouldn't have lied about being poor. Colton sat back down on the couch and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Mom, okay, maybe we weren't being completely honest about our situation, but it's not just about the money. What else is it about? Fairness. His voice became more confident. You own a house that's worth $500,000, and we rented an apartment for 3 whole years before we could buy our own, and we took out a 20-year loan. What am I supposed to do with that? Feel guilty? Not guilty, but responsible. To my family. To future generations. I looked at him puzzled. Future generations? Your kids are 8 and 10 years old. They have their whole lives ahead of them to earn their own homes. But why would they start from scratch when the family already has a house? Interjected Sloan. It's only logical to pass the real estate on to the children and grandchildren. After I die, yes, but not now, while I'm still alive and well. And when you die? Asked Colton abruptly. In 10 years, 15, the children will be grown up by then. They'll have their own lives, and now they could grow up under normal conditions. Those words struck me with their outright cruelty. My son spoke of my death as if it were an unfortunate delay in his plans. So, you think I've lived too long? I asked quietly. Colton hesitated, realizing how his words sounded. No, that's not what I meant. It's just, what did you mean? I pulled another page out of the folder. Maybe the same thing I wrote to my wife 2 weeks ago? I quote, Mom's getting more and more stubborn. Apparently, old age isn't going to make her any more cooperative. We must act decisively before she goes completely mad. That was said in the heart. And this? I found another piece of correspondence. Your conversation about old people not understanding the realities of modern life, and that sometimes you have to make decisions for them? Sloan tried to interject. Vivian, you're taking phrases out of context. We were discussing general things, not specific plans. General things? I opened a folder on another page. And here's your correspondence with the real estate agent. Very specific. You were wondering if the house could be sold without the owner's consent if he was declared incapacitated. We were just exploring options, Colton muttered. And here, I turned the page, you're discussing which nursing home to put me in, studied reviews, compared prices, very carefully. Sloan stepped away from the window and sat on the edge of the couch. Look, Vivian, we may have said some stupid things, but at the end of the day, we came to you with a fair offer. We didn't go behind your back. Didn't act? I laughed. And what would you call ordering an appraisal on a house, consulting with lawyers, finding a suitable senior housing complex? It was preparatory work, Colton said uncertainly. Preparation for what? He didn't answer. Sloan was silent too, studying her hands. I pulled the last few pages out of the folder. And here's where it gets particularly interesting. Your correspondence from the day before yesterday. Sloan writes, if she won't agree peacefully, we'll go through the doctors. We'll find a psychiatrist who'll declare her insane. Old people are easily intimidated by medical terms. Sloan went pale. That's not what I meant. What did you mean? It's just, sometimes older people really need help with decision-making. It doesn't mean we meant to hurt you. And right here, I pointed to another snippet. Colton answers you. Good idea. Mom's always been too trusting of doctors. If the doctor says she'd better move, she won't argue. Colton stood up and turned back to the fireplace. This all sounds wrong in isolation from the situation. How is it supposed to sound right? We were worried about your health, for your safety. You live alone in a big house. What if something happened? Some kind of accident? I found the right page. Like here, where Sloane writes, what if she falls and breaks her femoral neck or forgets to turn off the gas? Old people often get absent-minded, and you reply, it would be nice if that happened on its own. Then the matter would resolve itself naturally. Silence hung in the room. Colton stood with his back to me, his shoulders tense. Sloane looked at me with the expression of a caught thief. We never planned to hurt you, she said quietly. No? Then what does this correspondence mean? I pointed to another sheet. Where you ask your sister if she knows a trustworthy doctor who won't ask too many questions when issuing a certificate of incapacity. Sloane covered her face with her hands. It was just a conversation, a theoretical one. Very practical for theoretical, with names, addresses, and prices. Colton turned to me sharply. Where did you get all this stuff, Mom? Where did you get our correspondence from? Does it matter? Important. Did you hack into our phones? Hired detectives? I looked at him calmly. I took advantage of the fact that you think I'm old and stupid. Colton took a step toward me, his face contorted with anger and bewilderment. In his eyes, I saw a mixture of fear and outrage. Fear at the realization of being exposed, and outrage that an elderly mother was smarter than he'd assumed. What do you mean taken advantage of? He asked sharply. Speak plainly. How did you get our correspondence? Sloane got up from the couch and stepped closer as well. Her hands were shaking, her voice trailing off. Vivian, if you were somehow accessing our private messages, that's a violation of privacy. I laughed, and that laugh sounded bitter even to myself. A breach of privacy and planning my forced placement in a nursing home is what? We weren't planning anything, exclaimed Colton. Answer the question. Where did you get this? I got up from my chair and walked to the fireplace, where family photographs stood on a shelf. Among them was one especially dear to me, Colton, on graduation day, radiant with happiness, hugging Ralph and me. He was so sincere then, so open. When did that change? At what point did my son begin to see me only as an obstacle to what he wanted? 6 months ago, I began, without turning back to them. You came to my birthday party. Do you remember? Of course we remember, Sloane said impatiently. What's that got to do with it? During dinner, you went to the bathroom and left your phone on the table, unlocked. I turned back to them. The screen was glowing, and I happened to see a notification from Colton. The message started with the words, "The old lady again." I got curious. Sloane went pale. You read my messages? Only one at first, but it was so unexpected that I decided to look at more. What message? Colton stepped closer. What did it say? I pulled one of the sheets out of the folder. Here it is. The old lady started talking about fixing the bathroom again, spending money on nonsense that's going to be left to us anyway. Tired of listening to her ramble on about how important it is to keep the house in order. Colton turned away, and Sloane bit her lip. And here's your answer, Sloane, I continued. How long does she have left? I'm getting tired of waiting for the inheritance. Maybe it's time to speed up the process. That's not what I meant, exclaimed Sloane. What did you mean? It's just, I've been frustrated. I was having problems at work. The kids were sick. And that's why you decided it was time for me to die? Colton clenched his fists. You had no right to read other people's messages. And you had the right to discuss my death as a business meeting? We weren't discussing your death. It was just emotional conversations. Emotional? I turned the page. And here's what you wrote an hour after that conversation. Sloane's right. Mom's been living too long. At her age, people are usually dead or at least helpless by now, and she's still running around figuring things out on her own. It's not right. I was angry. And this one? I pointed to another fragment. Your conversation the next day. Sloan. Found out from my sister about nursing homes. She says you can put a person there against their will if there's a medical condition. Your response? Interesting. I'll have to find out more. Sloan stepped back to the window, wrapping her arms around herself. It was just talk, theoretical musings. Theoretical? I pulled out a few more pages, and here are your internet searches for the next day. How to file an elderly person's incapacity, involuntary psychiatric hospitalization, inheritance lawyers. That day was a turning point for me, I continued. I realized that I needed to know the truth about your intentions, so I began to investigate the situation. Examine how? Colton stopped in front of me. Were you following us? I was taking advantage of the fact that you think I'm a technically illiterate old woman. There was bitterness in my voice. You yourself kept saying I don't understand anything about modern technology. And what have you been doing? Studying, learning really fast. I sat back in my chair. Turns out, when you're motivated, learning the basics of computer security isn't that hard. Sloan turned sharply from the window. Did you hack into our accounts? I didn't hack, took advantage of your carelessness. I looked at them calmly. It's amazing how often people leave passwords in their browsers or use the same passwords for different services. How did you get access to our phones? Insisted Colton. And do you remember complaining 3 months ago that your laptop was broken? You asked permission to use my computer to send an urgent work email. Colton froze. So? You automatically logged into your email and social media, saved your passwords, and then forgot to log out of the accounts. But we changed the passwords afterward? We did, but not everywhere, not all of them. I opened a folder on another page. Besides, Sloan, you're very predictable with your passwords. Kids' birthdays, pet names, maiden name plus year of birth. Sloan sat on the edge of the couch, covering her face with her hands. Oh my God, how long has this been going on? 6 months, since the day I was born. And what have you been doing all those 6 months? Gathered evidence, systematically and thoroughly. I nodded at the folder. Every text, every phone call, every consultation with lawyers and realtors, everything is documented. You recorded our phone conversations? Horrified Colton. I didn't, but I saw who you called and how long the conversations lasted. And then I found information on those people and organizations. I pulled another section out of the folder. For example, Dr. Harrison, who you called on October 17th. The conversation lasted 23 minutes. I found his website, read up on his specialties, psychiatrist expert in age-related personality disorders, counsels on the incapacitation of the elderly. We were just counseling, began Sloan. And here's your correspondence after that counseling session, I interrupted her. Sloan. The doctor said the testimony of 2 independent witnesses about the strange behavior was sufficient, plus a report from the doctor's office. Colton, the paramedic won't be a problem. Dr. Miller knows our family, will believe we're worried about Mom. Colton sank down on the couch. We weren't going to do anything like that, really. No? I turned the page. Then what does the appointment with Dr. Miller for tomorrow mean? The purpose of the visit is listed as counseling for age-related changes in the mother. How do you know that? I called the clinic under the guise of your assistant. I was checking on the appointment time. Are you out of your mind? Exploded Colton. You're following us around like a private detective. And you're planning my destruction like professional assassins. We're not planning to kill anyone. What's this? I pulled out new pages. Your internet searches. What a natural death from old age looks like. Drugs that can cause a heart attack. Stroke symptoms in the elderly. Silence hung in the room. Sloan turned white as chalk, and Colton looked at me with horror. We're just out of curiosity. Out of curiosity? And buying digoxin at the vet pharmacy? Curiosity too? What digoxin? Whispered Sloan. A heart drug, deadly in large doses. Colton bought it the day before yesterday, supposedly to treat an acquaintance's dog. Colton jumped up from the couch. How do you know that? Are you watching my every move? Not everyone, only the suspicious ones. I calmly turned the page. And here's your conversation about putting this drug in my tea. Sloan wrote, you need to calculate the dose so it looks like a heart attack. You replied, you don't schedule an autopsy if the person is old and has had heart problems. We were never going to do that, shouted Sloan. It was just talk, fantasies. Fantasies that you paid real money for to real counselors? I got up and walked over to the window where the kids were playing. They had built a sort of fortress out of leaves and were now defending it from imaginary enemies. Their laughter contrasted with the gloomy atmosphere in the house. Do you know what struck me most? Said I without turning around. Not the greed, not the murder plans. It was how easily you talked about using the children. What do you mean? Colton stepped toward me. Right here, I pointed to the folder. Sloan writes, if Grandma resists being placed in a clinic, we can tell the kids that she's seriously ill and needs special care. The kids will believe and support our decision. And you say, that's a great idea. Brixton is very impressionable and will easily believe any story about illness. And Tallis is just a little girl. She won't understand. Sloan cried. We weren't going to hurt the kids. Not harm them? You plan to use them as a tool to psychologically pressure me. That's not true. And the meeting with the child psychologist? Dr. Stone, a specialist in working with children in family crisis. You consulted with her about how to properly explain to the children the need for grandma therapy. Colton sat back down on the couch, resting his head in his hands. How did you even know about that? I told you, when you're motivated to survive, you learn really fast. I turned to them. The internet is full of information if you know where to look. Bank statements, doctor's appointments, search history, everything leaves a trail. You hacked into our bank accounts? Horrified Colton. I didn't hack. I looked at the statements you printed out at home and left on your desk. Took pictures of them when you left. When? Every time you came over. While you were playing with the kids in the yard, I'd take a quick look through your stuff. Sloan stopped crying and looked at me in amazement. You searched our bags? Not searching, just noticing things you didn't bother to hide. Papers, receipts, notebook entries. I pulled out the last section of the folder. Here, for example, is your plan of action for the next 2 months, written in Sloane's hand, found in her bag 3 weeks ago. Colton looked up. What's the plan? Point 1. Convince my mom that a medical evaluation is necessary. Point 2. Arrange with the doctor for a suitable diagnosis. Point 3. Get the paperwork for involuntary hospitalization. Point 4. Enough, shouted Sloan. Stop reading. Item 4, I continued nonchalantly. Transfer the house to Colton by power of attorney. Point 5. Sell the property and split the money. There was complete silence in the room. Even the children's voices in the yard had quieted down. Apparently, they had moved on to play in another part of the garden. What are you going to do with all this? Asked Colton quietly. What would you do if you were me? I asked back. Mom, please. He stood up and walked over to me. We're a family. We can talk things out, work things out. Work it out? I laughed. How can you resolve an issue with people who are planning your death? We didn't plan your death. Then what did you plan? He didn't answer. Sloane was silent too, realizing that any explanation would only make their situation worse. That's what I think, I said. Some things can't be explained or justified. One can only take note and draw the appropriate conclusions. My question hung in the air, and I watched them mull over the answer. Sloane wiped away the last of her tears and straightened up, something defiant in her posture. Colton stood by the fireplace, clenching and unclenching his fists. The atmosphere in the room was heating up with every passing second, as if it were before a thunderstorm. You know what? My son finally said, turning to me. Enough of this circus. You've been spying on us, gathering information like some kind of paranoid. Paranoid? I raised an eyebrow. That's an interesting assessment from someone who planned to incapacitate my mother. We didn't plan anything. Colton took a step toward me, a threatening note in his voice. And then, even if we did discuss different options, that's our right. We're your loved ones. We're worried about your future. Worried about my future or your financial options. Sloane got up from the couch and walked over to her husband. Vivian, you're turning everything into some kind of cheap drama. Yes, we've talked about what happens when you're older. That's normal for any family. It's normal to discuss speeding up the process. It was a figure of speech. And consulting doctors and lawyers are figures of speech too? Colton waved his hand dramatically. Mom, you're out of your mind. You see conspiracies where there aren't any. Maybe you do need medical attention. Those words sounded like a threat. I realized that even now that their plans were revealed, they would not give up trying to turn the situation against me. In their eyes, I saw the same cold calculativeness that read so clearly in their correspondence. Are you threatening me? I'm stating a fact. You are behaving inappropriately, spying on your own family, constructing conspiracy theories, refusing reasonable suggestions. Sloane nodded. It might be worth seeing a specialist. Sometimes age-related changes affect your ability to think straight. I laughed, and that laugh was full of bitterness. Amazing. Even now that your plans are fully revealed, you're trying to paint me as crazy. And you're not crazy? Colton stepped closer. A normal mother wouldn't spy on her own children. Normal children don't plan to forcibly hospitalize their own mother. We weren't planning on hospitalizing anyone. How many times do I have to tell you? And private clinics? And doctors who don't ask unnecessary questions? Sloane turned away to the window. That was just talk, theoretical musings. Very expensive for theoretical. A consultation with Dr. Harrison cost you $300. Colton froze. How do you know? I know all about your spending over the last 6 months, including paying the detective who looked into my medical history. Fear flashed in their eyes. They hadn't expected me to look so deeply into their activities. I saw them interject, trying to figure out what else I might know. A detective? Whispered Sloane. A private agency called Discreet Investigations. You paid them $800 for information about my health, financial status, and social connections. Colton turned pale. We just... You wanted to know if I had any problems that could be used against me in court? No. Then why did you want my medical records? They were silent, realizing that every word could only make their situation worse. I paced around the room, feeling more confident than I had in months. I could finally speak openly without pretending I didn't know about their plans. Also, I continued, you've been in contact with the Premium Estate Real Estate Agency. You were wondering how quickly you could sell the house after the title deed. Sloane turned around from the window. We were just studying the market. Studying the market? I pulled another sheet out of the folder. And here's your correspondence with the interior designer. You were already planning how to convert my bedroom into a nursery for Tallis. Those were dreams, exclaimed Colton, People have a right to dream. Dreams for $800? That's what it costs to consult a designer. Children's laughter came from the street. Brixton and Tallis were still playing in the yard, unaware of the drama unfolding in the house. Their carefree attitude contrasted with the heavy atmosphere inside. And the children? Asked Colton suddenly. Have you thought about the children? About what they'll lose? What will they lose? A grandmother their parents want to put away in a mental institution? We didn't mean to. We did. And you know what struck me most about your messages? I walked over to the window, watching the grandchildren playing. The ease with which you talked about using the children. What do you mean? I opened the folder to the right page. Right here, Sloan writes, if Grandma resists, you can tell the children that she is sick and needs special care. The kids will believe and support the decision. And you reply, good idea. Brixton is very impressionable, will easily believe any story about illness. Sloan covered her face with her hands. We weren't really going to. You weren't going to? And the meeting with the child psychologist? Also an accident? Colton looked up sharply. What meeting? Dr. Emily Stone, a specialist in working with children in family crisis situations. You've been consulting with her about how to explain to the children Grandma's illness and the need for her treatment. How do you know that? His voice trailed off. I told you, I know everything. Every move you've made, every lie you've told, every mean thing you've done. Sloan stood up and started pacing the room. Okay, let's say we did plan for some things, but we weren't doing it out of greed. We were thinking about the future of the family. About the future of the family? I laughed. And here's your correspondence about what to spend the money from the house sale on. A new car, a vacation in Hawaii, condo renovations. Very noble goals. People have the right to plan their lives, not at the expense of murder or forced hospitalization of relatives. We weren't planning to kill anyone, exploded Colton. That's absurd. Then what does your talk of accidents that could have solved the problem naturally mean? He froze, realizing that I knew about those reports as well. They were just silly fantasies. When a man is tired and angry, he can say all sorts of things. Fantasies? I pulled the last pages out of the folder. And here are your internet searches. How to induce a stroke in an elderly person. Drugs that cause a heart attack. How to make an accident look like a natural death. A dead silence hung in the room. Sloan stopped like a dumbfounded person, and Colton turned so pale he seemed sick. We're just out of curiosity. Out of curiosity? And buying rat poison 3 weeks ago? Curiosity too? We did have rats, exclaimed Sloan. In the 7th floor apartment? They were silent. I watched their last defenses crumble as they realized that I knew even more than they'd assumed in their worst nightmares. You know what? I said, walking toward the door. I think our conversation is over. What do you mean? Colton followed me out. Exactly what I said. Pack up the kids and leave. Mom, don't be so dramatic. We can talk things out, find a compromise. Compromise? I stopped and looked at him. What kind of compromise can there be between me and the people who are planning my murder? We didn't plan your murder. Good. They're planning my forced confinement in a mental institution. Is that better? Sloan walked over to us. Vivian, maybe we should cool down and talk later, when the emotions have settled down. Emotions? I opened the front door. Do you consider this an emotional reaction? Well, yes, you're upset, we're upset. But we're family, we can work things out. No, I shook my head firmly. Some things can't be solved. After what I've learned, there's no more trust between us. Colton stepped out onto the porch and turned to me. So now what? You're going to break off your relationship with your only son because of some talk? Because of plans to kill me or incapacitate me. Yes, I'm going to. We weren't planning to kill anyone, and we weren't planning on incapacitating you. The evidence says otherwise. Sloane followed her husband out. And the children? Are you willing to deprive yourself of grandchildren? You're the one willing to deprive your children of their grandmother for the sake of the house. Not true. Then explain why you need advice about forcibly institutionalizing the elderly. They were silent. In the yard, Brixton and Tallis noticed that the adults had left the house and ran to the porch. Their faces were glowing from playing in the fresh air, cheeks flushed from the activity. Time to go home? Asked Brixton, shaking leaves off his jacket. Yes, replied Colton briefly. Pack your things. Is Grandma coming with us? Inquired Tallis, approaching me. No, I said, leaning toward the girl. Grandma's staying home. When are we coming to see you again? I looked at Colton and Sloane. Ask your parents. The kids ran to the car, gathering their few belongings. I looked at them and thought about the fact that they would be hostage to this situation. But there was no alternative. I couldn't continue my relationship with the people who were planning my death. Colton remained standing on the porch. In his eyes, I saw a mixture of anger, confusion, and something akin to panic. Mom, you're making a huge mistake. Maybe. But it's my mistake. We're not coming over again. I get it. And we're not bringing the kids. I get that too. Sloane tugged on her husband's sleeve. Come on, she picked it out herself. Colton made another attempt. Think about what you're losing. Family, children, everything. And what were you thinking about when you planned to get rid of me? He didn't answer. They reached the car, and I watched Sloane whisper something fervently to her husband. Her gestures were abrupt, angry. Colton got behind the wheel, slamming the door so hard that the sound echoed down the street. Before he started the car, he rolled down the window and shouted, When you get sick, don't call us. When you get old and helpless, remember this day. I will, I replied calmly. The car touched down, and I could see my grandchildren's faces in the back window. Tallis waved at me, and Brixton just stared with bewilderment. They didn't yet understand what was happening, but they felt something had changed forever. I closed the door and leaned my back against it. The house was silent, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the fireplace. There were still shards of broken plate and apple pie on the floor. I went to the window and looked out at the empty street. The neighbors must have heard the screams, but no one came out to look. In Milford, people knew how to respect the boundaries of privacy. For the first time in a long time, I felt relief rather than bitterness. The truth, however painful, had freed me from having to pretend I didn't know about their plans, from having to smile at people who plan my destruction, from the toxic relationship that had been poisoning my life for 6 months now. The house was truly mine again, and I intended to live in it for as long as I wanted.